Ben's hand tightened around the wheelchair's armrest as he strained to listen. He couldn't see them, but he knew who it was. Footsteps echoed down the hallway, slow and deliberate, mocking his helplessness. Laughter followed, not just Dora's, but a man's voice, Akoto. Ben's heart pounded in his chest. His worst fears were coming true. The sound of their whispered words pierced the silence, each one a knife twisting deeper into his gut. Dora, please. Ben's voice trembled, barely above a whisper, but she didn't answer. Their laughter filled the air as they passed him, hand in hand, heading toward the bedroom that was supposed to be theirs. The door creaked shut, leaving Ben alone with his rage, his heartbreak, and the crushing weight of betrayal. Ben and Dora's love story began like a dream. They met in the vibrant heart of Lagos, a city bustling with life, ambition, and opportunity. Ben, a newly employed engineer, was just settling into his career when he crossed paths with Dora, a driven young woman with dreams of building her own fashion empire. The early days of their relationship were nothing short of perfect. Dora was captivated by Ben's intelligence and charm, and Ben found himself falling for her independence and fierce ambition. They spent hours dreaming of the future, of building a family, owning a beautiful home, and living the Lagos dream. Within 2 years, they were married, and their life seemed like a fairy tale. Dora's business started gaining traction, and Ben quickly climbed the corporate ladder. Together, they built a beautiful home and became the couple everyone envied. But as their individual successes grew, their relationship slowly began to fracture. As Ben's career progressed, so did the demands on his time. Long hours at the office, late-night meetings, and frequent trips kept him away from home. At first, Dora was understanding, but as the years passed, Ben's absence became the norm, and the distance between them grew. Dora, now a successful businesswoman with several stores, had also become more independent. She attended high-profile events, networked with the city's elite, and seemed less and less interested in the life they had once shared. The once passionate marriage had now become a routine of exchanges about work and household responsibilities. Ben began to doubt her love. Was Dora still in love with him, or had she become attached to the wealth and status he provided? His insecurities ate away at him, and rather than communicate his fears, he kept them bottled up, allowing the seeds of mistrust to take root. Convinced that Dora no longer cared for him the way she once did, Ben came up with a plan, a cruel plan, but one he thought necessary. He would fake a serious illness to see if Dora would remain by his side or abandon him when things got tough. Ben started slowly, complaining of mild symptoms at first: fatigue, body pains, and occasional dizziness. Dora, ever the caring wife, initially showed concern. She suggested he see a doctor, made sure he rested, and even cancelled a few of her business engagements to stay with him. Weeks passed, and Ben escalated his act. He started pretending to be weak, dragging his feet, and losing weight deliberately by skipping meals. He confided in Dora one evening that the doctor had diagnosed him with a serious but unnamed illness. Dora was shocked and worried, but Ben noticed her shock wasn't as deep as he had hoped. For a while, Dora stayed by his side, but as time passed, she began to change. Slowly but surely, Dora became more distant. She started spending more time out of the house, attending late-night business meetings, and dressing up for social events. The late-night whispers on the phone became frequent, and Ben's suspicions deepened. At first, Dora thought it was a sickness that was going to last for some few days, but as the days passed by, she realized it was getting worse. One early morning, Ben complained of not being able to see properly. Things appeared blurred to him and wanted to see his doctor. As he tried to get out of bed, his legs became weak and he fell off the ground. Dora told him she was late for work and left him without even checking what might be wrong with the husband. Ben's condition got worse. He could not walk or see anything now. Dora then decided to take him to the hospital. Ben sat in his wheelchair at the hospital, staring blankly ahead as the doctor spoke. His once sharp eyes were now hidden behind dark glasses. His vision had deteriorated almost completely. The news was grim, with no clear answers for his condition. Ben listened silently, feeling his life crumble around him. His legs no longer worked, and now his sight was slipping away too. Dora stood beside him, her expression distant. She gave his hand a quick, obligatory squeeze, but released it almost immediately. Ben could sense her growing detachment, but he was too weak to say anything. The doctor's voice broke through the silence. "Mr. Ben, we'll keep running tests, but rest is crucial. Avoid stress, and hopefully we can find a treatment." Ben nodded, feigning shock. He glanced at Dora, hoping for some comforting words, but she didn't meet his gaze. Instead, she was already scrolling through her phone, lost in her own world. Weeks later, Ben found himself completely reliant on the wheelchair. He always wore his dark glasses, his vision nearly gone. The once lively house had turned cold and silent. Dora barely spoke to him anymore, her presence more of a burden than a comfort. Ben sat alone, waiting for Dora to bring him food. His body was frail, his spirit broken. He could hear her moving around in the kitchen, but the sounds felt distant, as though they were coming from a different world. In the kitchen, Dora stood by the sink, phone pressed to her ear as she spoke to her friend. "I don't know how much longer I can do this, Ada. Ben's like a ghost in this house. I didn't sign up for this. I fell in love with him for his money, not to be his nurse." She laughed cruelly, stirring a pot of stew. Then, with a casual flick, she spat into a glass of dirty water and poured it into Ben's bowl of soup. "If he wasn't rich, I would have left long ago. Now that he's not working, what's the point?" she added, with Ada's faint laughter echoing from the other end of the call. Dora wiped her hands, grabbed the tray, and walked back to the living room. Ben, sitting still, could hear her approaching. His hands twitched slightly, but he remained silent. Dora placed the tray in front of him, faking cheerfulness. "Here's your food. Eat while it's warm." Ben nodded slowly, reaching for the spoon. The aroma of the food was off, but he was too broken to argue. He lifted the spoon to his mouth, only to grimace at the foul taste. He lowered the spoon, his eyes welling up behind the glasses. Dora's voice turned cold again as she headed back to the kitchen, leaving Ben to sit in silence. He had seen enough, but he was too tired to fight back. The home that had once symbolized their love now felt like a prison. One evening, Ben overheard Dora talking to a friend. "I don't know how much longer I can do this. It's draining. I feel like I'm suffocating in this house," she said, frustration evident in her voice. Ben's heart sank. Was this it? Was Dora already planning her life without him? As days passed, Dora's outings became more frequent, and Ben noticed large amounts of money disappearing from their joint account. Rumors soon reached him. Dora had been seen at high-end events with a younger man. His heart raced with anger and betrayal. One night, Ben followed her to a fancy restaurant. From the shadows, he watched as she laughed and held hands with a man half his age. His blood boiled as they shared an intimate dinner. completely oblivious to the world around them. Now, Ben was sure. Dora was waiting for him to die, eager to move on with her life and his money. The betrayal cut deeper than he could have imagined. But instead of confronting her, Ben decided to wait. He needed to see just how far she would go. That night, Ben sat alone in the living room. The air was thick with tension. He heard the front door creak open and the sound of voices. His senses sharpened. One voice was Dora's, but the other was unfamiliar. Ben shifted slightly in his wheelchair, gripping the armrests as the footsteps drew closer. Who has entered? He asked softly, his voice trembling with both hope and dread. He already knew the answer, but wished desperately that he was wrong. Dora's voice echoed back, cold and dismissive. I'm tired, Ben. I need to rest. Ben heard soft laughter, but it wasn't coming from Dora alone. His heart raced as the reality of the situation hit him with full force. He listened as their footsteps neared. He could hear them now, slow, deliberate, mocking. And then Akoto stepped into view, holding Dora's hand. Ben's blood ran cold. Akoto was Dora's old flame, the one she had left behind for Ben's wealth. Now they were together again. Dora, please, Ben whispered, barely audible, but they didn't acknowledge him. Akoto and Dora walked past, holding hands as though he wasn't even there. Ben heard the door to their matrimonial bedroom creak open, and his heart shattered into pieces. He strained to hear their footsteps fade into the room where they had once built their life together. Now, that same bed was being desecrated by another man. Tears streamed down Ben's face behind the dark glasses, each one burning with betrayal and agony. His hands trembled, his knuckles white from gripping the wheelchair. The pain was unbearable, yet he remained frozen, unable to scream, unable to move, unable to stop what was happening just a few feet away. In the dim light of the bedroom, Dora and Akoto shared an intimate moment, their laughter cruel and heartless. Dora leaned against him, her fingers tracing his chest as they sat on the bed, the same bed where she had once promised Ben forever. Akoto teased her. Do you regret leaving me for him? Dora's laugh was hollow. At the time, I made the right choice. He had everything, money, status. But now look at him, weak, blind. What can he offer me anymore? Akoto smirked, pulling her closer, oblivious to the gravity of their betrayal. Back in the living room, Ben's chest tightened with each passing moment. The darkness around him felt suffocating, his heart aching from the weight of betrayal. Tears continued to fall, but he didn't wipe them away. This was his breaking point. Why, Dora? He whispered to himself, the pain too much to bear. He wanted to end it all. But somewhere deep inside him, a small flicker of hope remained. A fragile part of him still believed that Dora might change, that there was still a chance she could prove him wrong. He needed to see her for who she truly was, to make peace with the truth, whatever it may be. His fists unclenched slightly as he wiped the tears from his face. Maybe, just maybe, Dora would regret this. He needed to give her one last chance. As Ben listened to the sounds of betrayal from the next room, he made a silent vow. Tomorrow, he would confront her. Tomorrow, he would make her face the consequences of her actions. But tonight, he sat quietly in his wheelchair, crying as the echoes of their laughter filled the once loving home. His world would never be the same again. The dining room was dimly lit, with shadows stretching over the polished wooden table. Ben sat at the head, his black glasses lying beside his trembling hand. The house was eerily quiet, save for the steady ticking of the wall clock. His mind was heavy, consumed by painful memories and the overwhelming weight of betrayal. He stared blankly at the empty space before him, his heart aching. Tears welled in his eyes as he leaned back in his chair, running his hands over his face. Why, why do I always meet the wrong women? He whispered, his voice breaking under the weight of emotion. He shook his head, his chest tightening with sorrow. Looking upward, as though seeking answers from the heavens, he spoke again, his voice strained. God, why? Is it a crime to love someone truly? To give my heart completely? What have I done to deserve this? His words cracked with frustration. As his mind drifted back to the past, a painful past he thought he had long buried, the memories returned, uninvited. Years ago, Ben had faced another heartbreak. He sat on the edge of his bed, much younger, his head buried in his hands. His phone buzzed incessantly beside him, filled with unread messages from friends trying to console him, but he couldn't bring himself to respond. He was in the depths of heartbreak, his face pale from countless sleepless nights. Afi, the woman he had loved deeply, had left him without warning. He had given her everything, his time, his heart, his loyalty, but she had thrown it all away for someone else. The betrayal had shattered him, leaving him a shell of the man he once was. His phone buzzed again, and this time it was a message from his sister. Ben, we're here for you. Don't do anything you'll regret. Please, let us help you through this. Tears streamed down Ben's face as he stared at the message. For weeks, his mind had been in a dark place, thoughts swirling about how the heartbreak had broken him. He had almost checked into a mental health hospital, thinking he would never recover. But with the support of his family and friends, Ben slowly began to heal. He wiped away a tear, the memory still fresh. The pain had been unbearable, but somehow he had survived. After that heartbreak, Ben had sworn to himself that he would never love again. He had promised that he would never allow himself to be vulnerable like that again. I promised never to love again, he whispered, his voice weak. Ben clenched his fists, fighting back the flood of memories, but they came rushing in. 3 years later, he was walking through the busy streets of Lagos, trying to move on with his life. He was cautious now, careful about opening his heart again. But then he saw her, Dora. She stood out in the crowd, her beauty striking, her presence magnetic. Ben stopped in his tracks, his heart racing. He tried to look away, but he couldn't. There was something about her that pulled him in, despite the walls he had built around his heart. When I saw her, I couldn't look away, Ben recalled. I told myself I wouldn't fall again, but with Dora, something was different. They met, exchanging pleasantries. Her smile was warm, her laugh contagious. Despite the voice in his head warning him to be careful, Ben found himself drawn to her. Weeks later, they were sitting across from each other at a restaurant. Dora laughed at one of his jokes, her eyes bright with joy. Ben smiled, but deep down, he remained wary. He had been burned before, and he wouldn't allow it to happen again. I convinced myself she would be different. I was careful, so careful. But now, sitting at the dining table, Ben's smile faded. He remembered how he had allowed himself to fall for Dora, despite all his reservations. He had been cautious, testing her before fully giving his heart. He had wanted to protect himself, to ensure she wouldn't hurt him the way Afi had. But now, once again, he was sitting in silence, betrayed. The familiar ache of heartbreak gripped his chest. And now, look at me, Ben said, his voice thick with emotion. I thought I was being careful. I thought she was different. His voice broke as he buried his face in his hands, sobbing softly. Why, God? Why do I keep trusting the wrong women? Why do I keep getting hurt? I just wanted to love, to be loved. Ben's heartache lingered. the pain of love and betrayal suffocating him once again. It was supposed to be a special day, their wedding anniversary, a day that once held meaning for Ben and Dora, a day filled with memories of promises and love. But as the years passed, that meaning faded away, at least for Dora. Ben, however, had been waiting for this day, not for the celebration of their love, but for the moment he would reveal everything. Ben had planned it perfectly. Dora, unaware of what was coming, had forgotten about the anniversary entirely. In fact, she had been preparing to leave Ben's life for good. Over the past few weeks, she had secretly packed her belongings and moved them to Akoto's house. Akoto was her escape route, her way out of a marriage that no longer held any value to her. All that remained was finding the right moment to leave Ben for good. Ben knew all of this. He had seen her pack her things and knew where they had gone, but he kept quiet. His heart heavy with pain, he waited for the perfect moment to confront her. On the night of their anniversary, Dora dressed elegantly, preparing to go out as usual. Her long, shimmering dress hugged her curves, and her makeup was flawless. She had no intention of staying home. In her mind, the anniversary was meaningless, just another excuse for Ben to try and win her over again. But as she stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her jewelry, Ben entered the room. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "Dora, tonight is special," he said, his voice barely masking the bitterness. "Stay home so we can celebrate our anniversary together." Dora sighed, her face betraying her annoyance. She had plans for the night, plans that didn't involve Ben, but something in his tone made her hesitate. Reluctantly, she agreed, deciding that she could spare one evening before she disappeared from his life forever. Just as the evening settled into a quiet tension, there was a knock on the door. Dora looked at Ben, confused. "Who could that be?" she asked, her annoyance growing. She wasn't expecting anyone. "Just wait," Ben said, his expression unreadable. Dora opened the door to find two men standing on the doorstep. One was a lawyer, sharply dressed and carrying a briefcase. The other was a doctor, his face serious but calm. Dora's heart began to race as she struggled to understand what was happening. "Who are these men, Ben? What is this?" she asked, her voice shaky. Ben gestured for the men to come inside. His expression remained calm, but his eyes were cold. "They're here for a reason, Dora," he said, his voice steady. "But first, I have something to show you." Ben led Dora to the living room, where a large TV screen flickered to life. "It's a video of our wedding," he said, his voice emotionless. "I thought we could watch it together." Dora's eyes widened in surprise, but before she could protest, the video began to play. Except this wasn't their wedding video. The footage that appeared on the screen showed Dora packing her things, moving them discreetly into Akoto's car, whispering on the phone to her lover. Then, the scene changed to Dora and Akoto entering their home together, laughing and holding hands. Ben had installed CCTV cameras all over the house, and they had recorded everything, every secret conversation, every betrayal. Dora's mouth fell open in shock. She had no idea she was being watched all this time. Her knees began to tremble, and she collapsed onto the couch, her face pale. "Ben, I can explain," she stammered, but the words died in her throat. Ben turned to her, his expression cold and distant. "There's nothing left to explain, Dora," he said. "I've seen everything. The lawyer is here to cancel our marriage. It's over." The lawyer stepped forward, presenting the divorce papers with a solemn nod. Dora stared at the papers, her hands shaking as she realized how far things had gone. "And the doctor?" she asked weakly, still trying to grasp the situation. The doctor stepped forward. "Ben isn't as sick as you think, Dora," he said. "He's perfectly healthy." Ben took a deep breath, rose from the wheelchair, and removed his glasses, his voice filled with pain as he looked at her one last time. "It was all a test, Dora. I wanted to see if you were still here for me, or just for what I could give you." Tears began to stream down Dora's face as the reality of her situation hit her. She had been caught, and now she was losing everything. "Please, Ben." "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. But Ben, with tears in his own eyes, turned away. "It's too late, Dora. You've made your choice." And with that, the final chapter of their marriage came to a close, leaving Dora in tears and Ben with a broken heart, but free from the deception that had poisoned their lives for far too long. After the devastating confrontation with Ben on their wedding anniversary, Dora didn't waste any time. That same night, she packed her remaining belongings and went straight to Akoto's house. She had nowhere else to turn. Her heart was filled with anger toward Ben for revealing her secrets and exposing her infidelity. She wanted to escape everything and start over with Akoto. When she arrived at Akoto's house, she poured her heart out to him, telling him everything that Ben had done: the cameras, the lawyer, the doctor, the divorce. Akoto listened, his arm around her, comforting her with gentle words. "Everything will be fine, Dora," he whispered. "I'm working on completing our visas. We'll be leaving soon, and we'll start a new life abroad. You don't have to worry about anything." Dora's heart lifted at his words. She had lost so much, but she still had Akoto. The thought of leaving Nigeria with him and starting fresh gave her hope. Without hesitation, she transferred a huge sum of money from her account to Akoto's, trusting that he would use it to speed up the visa process. She was ready to leave everything behind. A week later, one early morning, Akoto dressed up, looking smart and determined. He kissed Dora on the forehead and told her he was going to check on the visas. Dora smiled, watching him leave, her heart full of hope for their new life. But Akoto never returned. Days passed, and Dora waited, growing more anxious with each hour. She called his phone countless times, but there was no answer. Her messages went unanswered. The sinking realization hit her slowly. Akoto had betrayed her. He had taken the money and disappeared, and she had no idea where he was. Dora's heart broke. She had lost everything: Ben, Akoto, and now even the hope of a new life. The stress and emotional pain took a toll on her body, and soon she found herself feeling weak and ill. One morning, after days of dizziness and constant fatigue, she collapsed and was rushed to the hospital. In the sterile, quiet room, Dora lay frail and weak. The doctor had given her the worst news. She had been living with breast cancer for a long time, and it had now reached its terminal stage. Nothing could be done to save her. The cancer had spread too far, and she would remain in the hospital until the end. Dora had no family to call for support. She was an orphan, and Akoto, the man she had pinned all her hopes on, had disappeared without a trace. Alone, she withered away, her body growing thinner and weaker by the day. She lost all her hair, her once beautiful face now gaunt and unrecognizable. In her final days, guilt consumed her. She knew she had wronged Ben, but she was too ashamed to call him. Still, something inside her urged her to try. With the last bit of strength she had, she mustered the courage to call Ben. Her voice was barely a whisper, thin and fragile. "Ben, it's me, Dora," she croaked into the phone, pausing for breath after every word. I'm at the hospital. Please, forgive me." On the other end, Ben could barely hear the voice. It was so faint that he struggled to recognize it, but he caught the name of the hospital she was at. Something in him stirred. He had every reason to ignore her call, but he couldn't. He drove to the hospital, unsure of what he would find. Later that day, Ben stood by the door of the room, his breath catching in his throat as he saw the woman lying in the bed. This was not the Dora he knew. She was frail, her hair gone, her skin pale, and her body so thin that she barely looked like the woman he had married. The sight of her broke his heart. Dora looked up, tears in her eyes. Her voice was so weak, Ben had to lean in to hear her. Ben, I'm sorry, she whispered, her tears falling. I've lost everything. Please forgive me. Ben stood there, his heart heavy with conflicting emotions. The betrayal, the lies, the pain, all of it rushed back to him. But as he looked at Dora, broken and near death, all he felt was sadness. There was no satisfaction in seeing her like this, only a deep, aching sorrow. He took her hand, squeezing it gently. I forgive you, Dora, he said softly, his own tears falling. Find peace. In her last days, Dora found that peace. She and Ben spent those final moments talking, reconciling their past, and letting go of the bitterness. Dora passed away quietly, her hand still in Ben's. The story of Ben and Dora teaches a profound lesson about the consequences of betrayal and greed. Dora, driven by selfish desires and the illusion of a better life, made choices that cost her everything: her marriage, her dignity, and eventually her life. She believed that money and escape with Akoto would bring her happiness, but in the end, she was left with nothing. On the other hand, Ben's patience and his ability to forgive, even after such deep hurt, shows the power of compassion. Though betrayed, Ben's forgiveness gave Dora peace in her final moments. Trust, love, and loyalty should never be taken for granted, and that greed and dishonesty will always lead to ruin. True happiness doesn't come from deceit or shortcuts in life, but from genuine love and trust,